If 2023 flew by for me, then 2024 could never chug along. This didn't have anything to do with the quality of the shows I covered. Like every year, it's gonna be some sort of mixed bag. But this is the time of year I celebrate all of them and spotlight my favorite episode of each of them. I took a look at 14 different shows this year, which is less than the past few years, but I wanted to spend more time on the reviews to make them as good as possible. And hopefully, this countdown follows in that spirit, so I'll get started. Number 14, Mad Props, Pony Life. This is the shortest thing on the list, so has the least going on. Not helping is that it's always so easy to compare Pony Life unfavorably to Friendship is Magic. But I like some episodes, including this one. The main six are putting on a play, but the props begin to malfunction. By that I mean they start to disappear, so they have to improvise the play more as it goes on. Good thing it already seems to be about a family moving in dire circumstances, so their imaginations don't run too wild. That's left to the final boss. As Rarity says,
"We need to fight materialism!"
But who or what could have caused the play to go awry? Who or whatever it was, every member of the main six had a chance to say something weird, so that makes me happy. I may never return to their group in a series review again, but they've given you and me good times such as this. Number 13, Pop's Nature Pup, the Quick Draw McGraw Show. Sorry to disappoint my quick draw aficionados, but I've only put one segment from the show on this list. But it's the one I was the most positive on in my review, so you can see that as a good thing. In this familial folly, Oggy Doggy and Doggy Daddy head into the woods to help in Oggy's nature studies, but he doesn't need books or parental guidance, he can just talk to animals to help them. A dog quacking at a duck should not be this funny 65 years on, but it is.
Quack, 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 quack! Quack, quack, quack! Quack, 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 quack!
There's a decent variety of animals featured in this 7-minute episode, and Oggy even finds the time to date this and do a Native American rain dance. How and why, we'll never know. Like I said, I don't know how much of these episodes I enjoy unironically and how much I enjoy ironically, but what I do enjoy is the irony that this doggy daddy doesn't believe his animal son can talk to animals. That is the viewer's clue, that this is a work of fantasy that shouldn't be imitated, and with little competition, the ending is the best part. It's a nice and logical cameo to close the story off with. Number 12, Indecent Exposure, Chalk Zone. Few people think of Chalk Zone as an especially lore-heavy show, but that's where this obscure, barely aired episode counters that perception. Just when you had faith in the news, here we've got reporter Terry Buffont pretty much stalking Rudy over this Greenland conspiracy connected to him. I mean, she breaks into an elementary school classroom during recess just to get evidence, which would be suspicious in just about any context. But this is mainly because of how many breaches there have been across the show at this point, as flashed back to. Rudy was always pretty lucky with keeping his secret from being exposed to the masses. Even Timmy and Danny let theirs slip at least once, and this is probably the closest it gets to being exposed. And even then, he and Snap are able to make a spectacle and allay any concerns. A good chunk of this show is about finding a creative workaround to big problems, and that's just what they do. The erasers aren't in the classroom, and Terry gets a piece of magic chalk, so their plan has to be more elaborate than usual. For all the public knows, Snap is just a really thin kid who actually does come from Greenland, not a chalkboard, which I guess is a Greenland itself. One of my favorite parts in this episode is him doing a little performer's shtick when he's presented to the station. He's rubbing it in that no one should find out about Terry's absurd conspiracy. And that's what this episode is. Entertaining, got some Nickelodeon stick it to the grown-ups energy, and tests the limits of the Chalk Zone narrative formula without breaking it. This episode didn't fall flat. Number 11, I Love Neddy, Dave the Barbarian. Ned Frischman is a gem of a villain. He has all the means to retroactively take over the world, but from the 2 episodes he appears, his goal is more to be popular with the people of the past. And in this one, he takes a joke book from 1946 and uses it to become the first comedian in recorded history. This instantly gives the writers a ticket to make bad jokes, with the actual humor coming from just how successful Ned gets from telling them. In fact, they make him an unstoppable force. Heaven knows how far he could have gone if he had a joke book from this year. You're right, not far at all. Before long, he's invented the sitcom, and so, to fight fire with fire, the barbarians invent reality programming. On one hand, this really dates the episode to when everyone was making fun of reality TV, but on the other hand, I don't mind. They have something to offer anyway, a story about Candy overwhelming Dave with her chores, but after becoming hated by the audience of people who just stand around in their castle all day now, gets pressured into doing her own chores. It takes some gymnastics, but Dave is able to stand up for himself this week. In fact, this is a good episode for Dave in general, as he gets to take down Ned with those conveniently hung feathers. If they got a season 2, I'm sure they could have produced episodes with a better chance of ranking higher here, but as it is, this is a fun way to spend 11 minutes, just like most Dave the Barbarian episodes. Number 10, the battle finale of Legend, Pokemon Season 12 and 13. Spoilers until this point. This was kinda strange to go back to on its own, removed from the context of the 150 something episodes leading up to it. I would recommend checking it out, but not before at least the first 2 parts of the trilogy it concludes. That way, you'll know about this Cyrus fellow and his plan to use Dialga and Palkia to create a universe in his image. Honestly, Cyrus is the best thing about this episode, and one of the best things about this era of the Pokemon anime. His plan is Zubat crazy, but it's quite a spectacle to see play out. Look at the budget he had for it, the legendaries are even CGI for a while. And him going through the closing portal, gloating about how fantastic his universe is, as he and Team Galactic are essentially defeated, is as poetic as it is silly. What's better is that Ash and pals had something to do here, and they'd spent the past 3 years building up to it. How's beating Pale not the most exciting thing Ash does in this region? And even though Dialga and Palkia are mostly on display, like a lot of captive legendaries in the anime, we do see their power, we do see the extent of what they're capable of together. This may not be my favourite episode of the Pokemon anime seasons I've covered. After much thinking, I'd have to go with Gotta Catch You Later, but this climactic confrontation with Team Galactic was still as big and thrilling as I remember it being. Number 9, Black Sheep of the Family, Cow and Chicken. Focusing on one of Cow and Chicken's many strange cousins, this black sheep guy is pretty normal. It's the rest of the world's sheer hostility to him that makes him a pariah. This is pretty true to life. Some people are looked down upon by society just for being them, and this episode gets to the root of why that's absurd. While his parents are having a second honeymoon, the sheep's forced to hang out with the bovine and the bird we've come to expect anything from, but while Chicken turns his back on him, Cow thinks he's in serious need of redemption. This is where the black sheep learns not to try too hard to be friendly by using big, scary words, and instead just helps people, saving a woman's life and then giving the red guy some pants from his own wool. The red guy is good in every appearance, but I mean, he's a cop here, and putting on an Irish accent out of nowhere. He knows the game, and is throwing his authority around until he gets what he wants. The black sheep isn't my very favourite character on this show, my heart still goes out to Boneless Chicken, but he's by far the most sympathetic. This is by design, the allegory with him is as subtle as red guy's cheeks are flat, but you feel bad for him, then good for him across the story. Tom Kenny gives an underrated performance as a normal, upstanding guy who's locked in the cow and chicken world, that'll randomly hate him, then randomly love him. Who says black sheep should still have a bad name? Number 8, The Village Elder, 101 Dalmatians, the series. Do you think when Disney was making 101 Dalmatians back in the 60s, that he and his team ever thought it would turn into this? Most of my favourite episodes of this spin-off are the strangest ones, and this takes the cake. The pups and dealies walk into a village one day with the DeVille name on it, and fall into a trance. It's learned that the village's evil ruler is an ancestor of Cruella's, whose evil tax collecting got the place cursed to trap all who stay in it and only show up once every 100 years. This is not the most tightly plotted episode of this show, but it's one that I love for its general absurdity. I knew this just had to be a parody of something, because there's no way this was all thought up in-house. But besides the village's curse and a romantic subplot, this doesn't have much to do with Brigadoon. It's more window dressing to a plot that further expands on the DeVille family tree. I like the interplay between Cruella and Judge Dimsdale, how they both have petty plans but Judge Retroville's is more evil, and even though they're under a spell for most of it, the Dailies and Dalmatians fitting into this random 17th century village is entertaining. But it's a good thing Judge Tremerton hates chickens, because that means Spot isn't under any spell and can live the Disney hero dream, breaking spells by kissing people. But she only kisses Roger on the lips. The others must have had intriguing censor notes. My favourite thing about this episode would be Lucky's relationship with Rebecca. Sure, they met under the influence of the spell, but they could have been a friendly enough couple. Alas, Rebecca has to stay behind, possibly for years in her time and tens of thousands in Lucky's, while he's left with no memory of her existence. In case this dramatic tragedy for the ages is too much for you, Rebecca's gonna fall into the public domain in 2094, so by then, there won't be long to wait to write yourself a happier ending. Number 7, The Penguin Who Loved Me, The Penguins of Madagascar. Spoilers until this point. While not the last episode produced or aired, this half-hour event makes a nice bookend to The Penguins of Madagascar, and conclusion to the Madagascar series as I'm currently familiar with it. All throughout this show, Kowalski's biggest weakness has always been his torn relationship with Doris the dolphin. Up until the end, it was just a joke, but now we get to see her and she lives up to the hype. Look at how fast she can move on land. This isn't much less ludicrous than your usual Penguins of Madagascar fare, but that's alright with me. In fact, it's one of the big positives again. Along with the title sequence, King Julian getting his joke in, then us moving on, some tense dodging of searchlights which brought back visions, unfair visions, and the complete lack of mystery about Doris's brother Francis. You're just waiting for Dr. Blowhole to come back out of him. It's a long wait, but a worthwhile one for this final battle being one of wits, Dolphin versus Penguin, and Kowalski's bravery is finally able to win Doris over. There was a close shave with Parker the Platypus at the start, who gives a bad name to platypuses, or platypi, or platypeople, you know what I mean. And one last pair of on-screen debuts that made all the difference. Manfredi and Johnson, stuck in Seaville. Which horrific backstory Skipper has regaled led to this? Probably one of the vague ones. Like the Pokemon episode lower on the list, this one makes more sense in the context of the episodes leading up to it, but it's an entertaining standalone story, which is why I put it way higher. Number 6, It's a Wonderful HalfLife, Cat Dog. This episode is hard proof that not every episode of this show is as cynical as folks remember. It's one of those that works hard to get Cat to appreciate Dog, and I think it does it in a stylish and memorable way. They get into a fight one night over a model train set, and against Winslow's warnings, go to bed mad. Winslow always giving bad advice, going to bed mad is the best thing that could have happened to them. They have this shared dream where they're both separate entities, living as black and white film characters during the Great Depression. Well, sepia tinted. I prefer filtering the colours when I watch these sequences. Makes it look more like a silly symphony gone wrong. The songs are good for what they are, and frankly, some of the best in Cat Dog. Dogs aren't especially complex lyrically, but only because he probably isn't a genius songwriter. And Cat's got a villain song about how rich and greedy he is. It would feel more like a villain song if it wasn't so simple and jaunty. But the whole point of this dream is that Cat wouldn't be able to make it through life without the heart he shares with Dog, and Dog needs a pal who can go where he goes. It's ironic how they come from completely different walks of life in the dream, but then the shot of them reaching hands in the dream bubble at the end is so good. Really sells the climax in here, even if the reality of the show is still chaos as always. But at least Cat and Dog are friendlier at the end of the tale than at the start. Despite the title, you can't say it's very festive, but don't worry, the next entry on this list is Number 5, A Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack Very Special Low Tides Day Special, a Knuckles story. As if the world of Stormalong couldn't be any less canny, they don't have Christmas yet. Instead, they have Low Tide Day, where once a night in the middle of every winter, in the lowest tide of the year, Folks hang old boots off the dock, and in the morning, they either get a gift or sacked by mermen. Captain Knuckles was unfortunate enough to have a bad experience with mermen, so will do anything to prevent them coming back for him this year. Just because he'll do anything doesn't mean he'll put much effort into that anything. But honestly, that Low Tidings pageant could have gone without a hitch if they didn't cast him in a demeaning role. Like many a holiday special, it's rewarding to see the Grouch finally do something good for someone. In Knuckles' case, give Bubby some water when she comes back while the tide's still low. He's done nice things for Bubby before, but this stands out as a life or death situation. Everyone else has a moment to shine in this dingy town. Of course, Peppermint Larry invented Santa Claus. He even gets permission from the local holy whitebeard guy, Poseidon. And I love how Poseidon is just a live-action guy painted blue most of the time. Makes him different enough from the other characters in the special without straying from the show's style. And Flapjack's songs are genuinely good. Like Dogs, part of the charm is how amateurish the lyrics can be, but if the melodies don't fit in with the classic Christmas jingles, which they snuck in despite not resembling that holiday until the very end. Glad they could get to something like it, because I don't think anyone in this world has heard of Jesus. Number 4, Tintin in Tibet, The Adventures of Tintin. It's hard to talk about any Tintin in Tibet adaptation without mentioning its origins. In 1934, when penning the 5th Tintin serial, The Blue Lotus, Hergé had based the character of Chang Chong Cheng on a close Chinese friend of his, Zhang Zhongren, but they lost contact after Japan invaded China in 1937. Decades passed, and amidst a messy relationship and dreams of endless white plains, Hergé wrote Tintin in Tibet as his way of catching up with Zhang. In 1981, 2 years before Hergé died, they finally reunited. This story holds a more personal weight to it than any other in the Tintin canon. For the first time in a dozen stories, you can see more of Hergé's personality shining out of the protagonist, his grief at how far apart he is from Chang, his determination to get through the endless white to check if he's okay. There's still a couple moments for Haddock and Snowy to supply some comic relief, but it's clear who's finally in charge of his own adventure for once. As an adaptation, this animated two-parter pays tribute to the original book as much as it tells it. The voice acting takes a step up, the art and animation are as accurate as they are effective in this form, and it's brilliant how they used some of their more ethereal sound effects for the Himalayas. It really sells the plot point that Tintin has a sixth sense when it comes to Chang's survival. The adventure is dangerous and gripping in places, but it's also a meditation on how far you're willing to go for a friend. That shines through in the book and the show, all this time later. Number 3, Cool Bikes, regular show. This placement could be recency bias, but I don't care. This episode is genius. Mordecai and Rigby, as you'd know by this point, are cool, if only to themselves. So, as a gambit to get their car privileges back from Benson, they turned the kids' bikes he gave them into the coolest rides they could, and don't stop accessorizing until Benson can admit they're cool. I call it a gambit because there's no way this should have worked. This is all to impress Benson, which back in season 3 was hard for them to do. But they certainly impressed me because the show's costume designers were giving it everything they had. Rig and Morty go through crap tons of charity shop costumes to find the right appearance that can impress their boss. And nowadays, they'd be laughed at in universe, but this is an encapsulation of early 2010s hipster chic. That DIY too cool to care look you saw all over blogs and in coffee shops. Younger viewers, if you want to know why the 2010s don't seem to have a distinct fashion, that's because we're embarrassed to show it. The regular part of this episode is when the two get so cool that they're zapped to an intergalactic court and put on the trial for their lives for being too cool for the universe to handle. They eventually escape and nothing bad happens when they get back home, so this could have simply been the most butthurt trial in history. The courtroom drama is an unbelievably common cartoon trope, and this might be my favorite use of it. It has Gary, and others don't. And the stinger to all of this? Benson admits they're cool, and their original problem with the cart isn't resolved. Hooray! Number 2, A Tale of Two Stands, Gravity Falls. Spoilers until this point. Now this is a masterpiece. Like I said in my Gravity Falls review, law shows were beginning to be big business at this time, so it was apt for such a well-rounded example already to set a high bar for what to expect in world development. Here we have Stan and Stan, Stanley and Stanford. One's a skeevy miser, the other's a super genius who's been dimension hopping for 30 years. Flashback time. Flashback episodes tend to be important must-watches for any show, and that's only accentuated if it's a character with a lot of secrets. Both Stans do, but Stanford because he's literally just been introduced. Basically, despite their shut-off parents and being seen as weirdos, they got along all the way until high school when mistakes were made and the perpetual motion of friendship stopped. Stanley got kicked out and had to leave a life of flimsy businesses, and Ford, despite his genius, was dropped into a second-rate university. Despite both Stans telling the story, it manages to shed Stanley in a more sympathetic light, which is no easy feat. Sure, Ford deserves to feel angry about what happened, but I mean, calling up your long-lost twin just to tell them to take a book and get lost is a pretty rude reunion. But they are slowly warming up to each other again in the present, even if that's going to take some more time. A lot of things about Gravity Falls are explained both quickly and thoroughly. We get to see a bit more of Mr. McGucket before he became so McGucky, and more on that, we see what the town was like before they all went a little McGucky themselves. To be young and have 20/20 vision again. I can tell this not being number one is going to be a big upset, and believe me, I feel it. Gravity Falls was by far the best show I reviewed this year, so its best episode being in the top 2 was inevitable. But it's a show that's far more rewarding to watch from start to finish, so an episode like this is best viewed in that way, but might be confusing or underwhelming if you go out and see it alone. That isn't the case with number 1, Customer Service, the Looney Tunes show. This is by far the funniest episode of anything I've seen all year, so most accomplished at what it set out to do. It's Bugs Bunny, that should not be a surprising statement, but this is about him losing his cable subscription because a turtle working for a cable company is trolling him. It's strange that this is as fun as it is, but after a couple minutes of going through your standard sitcom hardships, your standard kind of strife for the Looney Tunes show, Bugs makes his classic "this means war" declaration and disguises himself everywhere he can to get Cecil the Turtle to get his cable back. I like how this was the straw that broke the camel's back and brought all of this back into his personality. And Daffy was part of that straw, just doing something he knows is annoying and was excited to learn can be annoying. This is one of his least organic job plots in this show, probably the least, but that just makes it funnier how his uselessness keeps screwing over others in the story. Like with Bugs, they weren't interested in giving him an especially nuanced story, just something simple to do in an offbeat way. This is also the best episode for Tina, and there isn't much competition, even in season 2. What does she have to learn? How to be more positive behind the counter, or she's gonna remain suspended from work. Lola doesn't directly help, but she does give Tina an unusual perspective on what a positive worldview looks like. She's able to do her job right just the way she is, because that's what the copy place needs. And now we know what Giovanni does in this series. Patronize ducks. This episode has everything you'd love about the Looney Tunes show, with a bit of what people love about classic Looney Tunes. So if you still dislike this show after seeing this episode, then that's your loss. We have a new winner, Warner Brothers Animation. Good luck existing out there, and see you all in 2025, where I do the impossible and review Harvey Beaks. But before then, I'll do the completely possible and introduce a new commentary series about the black and white rodent that changed everything, complete with visuals. Happy New Year.